Hi, everybody. It's Wendy and Stephen here for another episode of TriVersity Talk. I'm Stephen Bloomer-Teague.
And I am Wendy Stuart Kaplan. Welcome tonight. We have two really exciting guests, two amazingly dynamic women from the United Methodist Church from Milford.
Absolutely. Yeah. But before we introduce them, we have been told by our producer to remind everyone that we're on Facebook Live and YouTube, or at least we will be on YouTube in the coming days. So if you're here and you're watching, do us a favor, smash that like button. Hey, if you even want to, give us a heart. That's even better. And we will put the link to our YouTube page in our comments. If you can go there, give us a subscribe and a like as well. We will appreciate it.
Right, because we want all of you with us on YouTube. Right, Stephen?
Absolutely. I mean, at least 100 of you, because then we can get our own domain name. But even more. But
we want you there anyway, because we love you and we appreciate all of you tuning in every week. Thank you so much. All right, are you ready to rock and roll?
Let's do this. Let's get our religion on.
Okay.
All right, so we are going to introduce our two guests. They are from Milford United Methodist Church. We will introduce first Pastor Kaleigh Corbett.
Okay.
And I'm going to bring Kaleigh onto the stream. And then next I'm going to introduce Janice Holleny.
Welcome.
Welcome, everyone.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. We're really excited to have both of you here. I mean, here we are in our beautiful center in Milford, Pennsylvania, the TriVersity Center right here. And I know it's a big subject, but we're here to talk about religion, aren't we?
Yeah, it's a big topic.
It's a big topic, specifically religion as it exists right now in the Methodist Church. Yeah. Okay. All right, Stephen.
So, Janice, I'll actually start with you, because you would have been, out of this dynamic duo, you were the first person I met. And we met, do you remember where?
At the community fair in Port Jervis on Martin Luther King weekend.
Absolutely. I know.
Simone.
Yep, TriVersity was tabling the event, as was Milford United Methodist. But what was Milford United Methodist doing at the event? What were you tabling exactly?
We were tabling as a Reconciling Ministries team within our church. And that means that we're a group within our local church that advocates for full inclusion of LGBTQ folks in the life of the church. No exceptions, no ifs, ands, and buts. And we wanted to present a different view of Christian religion as opposed to Jerry Falwell Jr. or some of those characters. We have a branding problem in the Christian faith, and we wanted to begin to address that.
That's really well put, too. A branding problem in the Christian faith. So this reconciliation, tell me the concept behind it and when it all came about. Because things in Christianity have been very much the same, as you know even better than I, for a very, very long time. Tell me how this all came about.
Within our church?
Yes.
It came about because since 1972, we've had discriminatory language about LGBTQ folks in our main document, which is called the Book of Discipline, stating that LGBTQ folks are incompatible with Christian faith. And that's a relatively new thing. It's only since 1972. And we, as a result of our general conference, I don't want to get too much in the weeds of Methodist polity, the larger church doubled down on that to make it even more punitive, that now clergy could be booted out of the church if they conducted a wedding, that gay clergy could be booted if they were honest about who they were. And there was a significant group within our local church, actually at a time before Kaleigh came. So Kaleigh inherited this at Milford, that were very, very upset and understood that this is not who we are. This is not who we want to project into this community. And out of that was birthed what we call Reconciling Ministries team, which has been lobbying. We're a lobbying group. We're a PAC without money to
Cheers.
Join the club.
to push our local church to be responsive, to do the right thing, but to be responsive to the community in which we live. And that community is Milford, Pennsylvania.
So, Kaleigh, how do the rules of discipline affect you as a minister? I mean, what could happen to you, say, if you conduct a gay wedding or something of that sort?
So the rules, so like Janice kind of alluded to, the rules kind of got even more punitive in 2019 at our special general conference, which was supposed to like solve the problem, solve the divisiveness within our church. But we have a legislative process that's not unlike our government. And so, it didn't go as expected. And actually they came down harder. So if a clergy person does a same-sex wedding, somebody in a church, a member of the United Methodist Church or another clergy would have to file a complaint that could potentially be processed and go to trial. And if you're found guilty, and it's like a panel of all Methodists, and you could be suspended without pay for a year, and then further down the road, you eventually could be defrocked, which means you lose your clergy credentials. And then
that's like a huge form of punishment.
It really is. It really is. And it's even harder for queer clergy who, it's in the Book of Discipline that the phrasing is self-avowed practicing homosexuals cannot be ordained or licensed for ministry. But there are queer clergy. They're everywhere. There's many of them. But their livelihood is at stake. They could be suspended without pay as well and lose their credentials. But here's the thing about all of this is that there awoke within the Methodist Church this movement. We kind of call it the rainbow wave. It was like similar to after 2016's election with that like blue wave that we saw.
The rainbow wave. I love
the rainbow wave.
The rainbow wave. So I know it's so funny, but so many people didn't realize that this language was in the Book of Discipline, right? The incompatibility clause that Janice mentioned, the information that, if you are a self-avowed practicing homosexual, you can't be ordained. They brought a bishop to trial or came down to the judicial council, which is like our Supreme Court. And they pulled out her marriage certificate, just terrible. We have an out gay lesbian bishop. Her name is Karen Oliveto. But so there's been this movement of resistance within the church. Bishops, including our own bishop here we're in the Greater New Jersey Conference, even though we're in Pennsylvania. He has said he will not process complaints related to LGBTQ+ issues. He will not process them to trial, whether it's about a person who is queer or like a pastor or a clergy person who is queer or someone who does a same-sex wedding. And the number of churches who have kind of said, we don't agree with these changes have stepped up and stepped out. So it's been like this massive movement of resistance within the church.
Wow. I'm curious because something Janice said first of all, what year did you come to the Milford Methodist Church?
I've been here a year. My first
only 1 year. And Janice, there was some resistance when you came in. What was the environment in the church for you when you came in?
There was a definite group of people that felt as though, that were very hurt by the decision. I mean, it's hard in 2020. Many people have gay and lesbian children. They have friends that they know. I mean, and so it was very hard, especially for folks that didn't know this language was in there, right? So there was a group, there were people who were ready to walk, to say, I can't be a part of a church that legislates harm, that does harm to people that I love. And that's hard. As a clergy person, it's so hard to see people leave, especially as someone who is so passionate about this and trying to move the church forward, to say, oh my gosh, but please just, stay. We're going to make change. But for some people, they're not willing to wait because perhaps they've been in this fight a long time and they're tired, or they just can't be in a place that is doing harm to their siblings, the people they love. So, it's been a journey over the last year of really doing some education. We were supposed to have another general conference in May that obviously got postponed due to Corona until next September. That really was actually moving towards a church split, essentially. We're one of the only mainline denominations, Protestant denominations, that have not split over this issue. The Lutherans have split, the Presbyterians have split, the Episcopal Church, so everybody else has split because of LGBTQ issues, and we're the only ones that haven't. And so some people feel that's where the church is headed. And so, we've been trying to educate and inform. I think that's been, and Janice, you might agree with that, but it's educate and inform and be very transparent that this is all happening, and that, many church people haven't thought about this. And so how do we get them to begin to think about how the Bible how we interpret scriptures around these and all of that. And so how do we really educate and inform and figure out where people are at? Because if the church does split, we have to figure out where we as a church are going.
Right. Where do you stand really as a church? I'm curious, when you came here, the demographic of the people that were going to your church, the young people versus the old people, and where the resistance was, I kind of already can figure out in my head where it might have been. But with the young people, how are you going to bring, many young people, right, have turned their back on religion? I can say that. And especially in the LGBTQ community, they don't want to, but they haven't had the support. They don't feel they've had a choice. So where do you think all this is going with them? And you can both answer that.
So I'm 33, so I'm a millennial. So I'm that generation that my friends don't go to church.
Your friends don't go to church.
We do have some young families who have come to our church because we talk about the issues that are in our world, because we don't shy away from talking about LGBTQ issues, immigration, healthcare, justice, any sort of justice, racism, right? I mean, Black Lives Matter. Those kind of things are important to many young people. We don't want to generalize to all millennials, but especially for folks that have LGBTQ friends or family, or they themselves are queer, identify as queer, or are questioning who they are. And I think it's really important that we say to the world and say to this community, look, there's a different brand out there, and you are beloved just as who you are, and we want to celebrate that, and we want you to feel like you can come into our doors and be welcomed and affirmed. Janice, I don't know if you want to jump in.
And I think our congregation is mostly there. Like Kaleigh said, it's a question of, I think, a lot of folks that have just never thought about it, and nudging them to think about it, and to think about, not, sometimes churches look at what they're going to lose. This idealized version. Wendy and I talked the other day about Fun with Dick and Jane, because I'm a millennial. I'll claim, not a millennial, I mean a baby boomer, so I'll claim. But this idealized family that never existed. In churches, some churches still will have people that will look backwards nostalgically at that. If only families stayed together, if only kids listened to if only, rather than looking at the opportunity that we have in this community, in this world, to show, to be forward looking, to show another alternative to something that really never existed in the 50s. It just did in those books.
Or the 60s. I mean, Kaleigh, both of you brought out a good point about, look at what families are now, right? What, you can have two moms of the same sex, two dads of the same sex, you blended families of all different nationalities, races. everything is blown wide open, right? But people are all looking for one thing. And you mentioned this the other day, that the comfort and what makes somebody comfortable. And to my mind, and probably to yours too, right? You want to be able to go to your church and find that there.
I mean, of course. I mean, more, you just really want to be there from a position of, I guess, both safety and acceptance, you know, not to feel, should I really be here? Is this necessarily where I'm supposed to be? I know I have spirituality and faith, but is this really, do you want me, basically?
The church has done so much harm. And, you know, especially the Methodist Church to LGBTQ folks, but other denominations as well. And, but also they've done harm to people of color, to indigenous people. I mean, the Methodist Church has roots in racism and, you know, towards all people. And, you know, and we're not exempt from corruption and doing harm. And I think that we're at a point in our culture, we've been through major cultural shifts in the last 100 years. I mean, you look at where we are now, and we're in the middle of another one.
It doesn't get any more crazy than this.
I said in a sermon recently, I said, you know, we're kind of in like a holy rummage sale. Like we're in this, that's a quote by Phyllis Tickle, but we're in this time that we're like trying to figure out where we're going to go, and we have to pivot. We have to begin to like leave behind the things that are not serving us in 2020 in order to move us forward. And I think some of that is like those traditional ideals that we hold on to so tightly. But what if church was a place and that is a brave space for folks? I always say I had a seminary professor who said there's no such thing as a safe space, right? You can't ever guarantee that a person who is oppressed or marginalized is safe. But there's such thing as a brave space, right? A place where somebody could come and share their true identity, where someone could walk in the door and hold hands with their partner and feel like it was okay to do that, right? And I mean, you know, I feel like queer folks we're always looking behind our backs to see where, if it is a brave, is it okay to do that here? And, you know, as a young pastor who has years and years and years of ministry left, I dream of a church that is a brave space for folks, where they can be vulnerable, where they can be real. And I think a lot of that comes down to sharing who you really are, whether it's, you know, I mean, especially when it comes to sexuality, because that's a huge part of who people are, right? It's more than just, it's more than just who you're dating, but it's a part of your identity.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, because in the end, it's sexuality. It's ultimately going to be who you love, you know, who you want to one day marry.
And you should be able to love whoever you want, you know, there shouldn't be any kind of boundary against that love. I mean, you know, we all have God in us, and we all have God's love in us. So maybe I love your way of thinking, because and you too, Janice, you're both very what I call forward thinking. But if people like you don't get out there and pave the way, now more than ever, and I say more than ever because last year I would have said more than ever, but now, you know, in the middle of like, oh my gosh, what is going on? This is such a pivotal time, and it's a time, I think, where church and religion can absolutely transition, you know, and be there for people. Lord knows we all really need a spiritual happening right now.
And I mean, and just kind of using that to segue, I mean, with the spiritual happening, what's been wonderful is from that Women's March in Port Jervis, or that community fair, Milford United Methodist and TriVersity have kind of partnered up in terms of trying to bring spirituality to the LGBTQ community. And our first real attempt at that was in March with our first Reconciling Faith roundtable, which was absolutely amazing. Janice and Kaleigh, do you want to talk about that roundtable?
Janice, go for it. This was all you. Go.
Okay. I think the expectation for that roundtable was perhaps the organizers, which were about 6 of us, and maybe a few other people sitting around a small table in the TriVersity Center, but people just kept coming and coming and coming. And so we ended up having a group of 25 people, a wide-ranging discussion that just sort of went everywhere, connections with churches in Port Jervis and people who, you know, churches that have similar attitudes to ours. And it was a good starting point. We did not come into this to evangelize, you know, to save people at TriVersity, to say, if you come to our church, we're going to fix you, you know, that we came into it looking at what we could gain, what we could learn. And I love events, I know for myself, where I can go in and walk out with more questions than I took into the room. And I think that was true that night. And then we stayed connected with Stephen, and we're going to roll out a new one on Zoom, Reconciling Roundtable, on Thursday night. So maybe
Thursday night.
Stephen could Thursday night on Zoom. And I'm suspecting that we will have good attendance for that, because we have a lot to say to each other. We are each other.
Oh, yeah.
We are.
Wow.
And just to let people know, if you are a member of our SOS Sharing Our Spirit Facebook group, we will post the Zoom details at that group. If you are a member of TriVersity's mailing list, we will mail that Zoom information on Thursday. So if you are neither on that group or on our mailing list, shoot us a private message and we will take care of that for you, because we want you there. These questions are important. So I warned Kaleigh I was going to do this.
Uh-oh, here it comes.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
Look at her, she's ready.
I'm ready. I got my notes.
So when it comes to reconciling faith, I mean, you have to, at least with the Abrahamic religions, I mean, of course, one of the places you have to go to is the Bible, because sometimes it seems like the Bible says some fairly disturbing things when it comes to, I mean, you know, being, you know, same sex, or, you know, being gay or lesbian. I mean, and I mean, even trans to some point, at least how some Bible verses are being interpreted. But so I'm going to do my best preacher voice, Southern preacher voice.
Oh, we're ready. Go for it.
And I'm going to give you a verse, and I want to see how you respond to it.
Right,
so
bring it on.
Leviticus 20:13. Go figure, 13. Lucky 13. If a man lies with a man, as one lies with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They must be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads.
You know, these are what progressive Christians like to call the clobber verses. This is one of many. You know, there's a lot. There's not a lot. There's a handful that we, you know, that people like to spew when you bring up, and they use the word homosexuality, right? Which, you know, I'm actually teaching people, like, we don't really use that word. I'm training people.
Why?
You know,
Kaleigh, before you even say anything, it's so hard for me because I always associate these verses with the word homosexuality. It's very hard for me. That's why I was kind of like tongue twisted and like, how do I even express it?
You know, I explain, I try and really educate people to that. I'm like, that word has been used to do so much harm. We have to avoid it. You know, and I always say, like, I use it when I have to talk about things that are like written. But anyway. But so this Leviticus, I mean, okay, the Leviticus text is one of the, I think, the more fun ones to kind of clobber back, right? So this whole section of Leviticus is a focus on ritual purity, right? And so it was for the Israelites, these people who had like wandered in the wilderness, and, you know, and then they left their home in Egypt, and they had to get like organized, and they were surrounded by other groups of people that were pagan religions, and God and the people who wrote these purity laws were like, hey, you need to be set apart. You need to be different from these pagan neighbors. And so I'm going to give you a list of laws that you need to follow that are contrary to what the people that are next door are doing for you. right? And so, one of them was the Canaanite religions. But there were many things listed in these lists of many laws, right? And so things like mixed clothing, like you couldn't have two different types of fabric in your clothing. I am sure the shirt that I am has cotton and polyester in it.
Oh my God.
Well, that is offensive to me.
And so
we don't want any polyester in our clothing. We're
I don't know what's in my clothing. Actually, I'm sure it's 100% cotton. But anyway, we all wear things that are mixed with fabrics. And then one of the texts immediately following talks about tattoos. And if you see, I have quite a collection. I mean, talk about that. Eating shellfish is part of that. And so, again, these laws were really put in place not to condemn people, but to say, this is how you're going to be set apart from these other people. And the word, I love that. What did your scripture text said? Detestful. Was that the word?
Yeah. So this is the New International Version.
Okay, so
I think it said
detestable, right?
Yeah, detestable.
So another way that's translated often is abomination.
Mm-hmm.
And that word is, leaves us with a terrible taste in our mouth. But actually, it can be better translated as unclean, taboo, or forbidden. Right. And it was, again, used for so many other things, right? So even sowing a field with two different types of seeds, weaving cloth from two fibers, forbidding eating shrimp, crab, pork, rabbit, different types of birds. So, and we don't follow those laws now. I mean, some people might, but we don't. And when Jesus came in the New Testament, right? And he wasn't focused on ritual purity. He was focused on the purity of heart, right? And so, but also with the people in this time, they were so focused on holiness, right? That if they were holy, they wouldn't lose the land that God had given them. And that was really important to them. And then just one other little thing that we can say is that the people in this time were real concerned about population growth.
There you go. Right.
That was crucial to the survival of Israel. It was crucial. And how do you grow the population?
Absolutely.
Right?
Not male on male copulation.
I mean, right.
Grow it
the major reason for these laws were that these communities needed to grow. They needed to survive. The survival was at stake if they didn't reproduce in appropriate numbers. And we see that later with how women's reproductive capabilities were controlled, and the spreading of seed was bad too. But it was always about protecting and increasing procreation. And the evidence just shows us that this was not referring to a committed, consensual relationship between two people of the same sex.
But you see, Kaleigh, analyzing it the way you're analyzing it, right? And the way you're looking at it, how would that fly when you take this, the New International Testament? Well, it's not so new. I mean, this is way old, the way they used to do things. How do you, when you're talking to your congregation, when this kind of thing comes up, how do you explain it, and how do you make it apply to our modern times? Because I know I'm half and half Jewish, half Protestant. I know in the Jewish faith, especially the Orthodox Jewish faith, so the laws of purity are they are etched in stone. How do you reach people to get them to reconsider what's written in this book?
So one of my big things, and actually a book that we're reading this summer, I'll plug it here, What is the Bible? It's by Rob Bell, is to really bring to light that the Bible is a living, breathing document, right? So the Bible didn't just fall out of the sky. Some people believe it did, and you know what? That's great. Methodists believe that it's the inspired word of God. We don't believe that it's from God's mouth to the pages that we read. This was written by human people who had agendas, right? Who were living in a particular time in a particular place. And so, of course, they're going to write from their own perspective. And so when I bring texts like these, I mean, I don't really preach this text from the pulpit, but you know,
it's like, well, be handed, right?
Yeah, that one doesn't usually come with sermon series. But if it were, you know, I'd say this is, friends, these are words from a particular time and place. We always have to look at what was happening at the time that this book was written, the time that who wrote it, where it was coming from, right? I mean, if you just read that, you wouldn't think, oh my gosh, who are the neighbors of the Israelites and what are they up to? I mean, they were doing things to try, I mean, and it said, the history says, like, they were doing these things to try to increase their crops and their livestock. And God is like, you know, in that time, they're like, no, that's not what you're going to do. And so it's always like, taking, like, we can cherry pick. I don't have my Bible's downstairs, but like you can cherry pick a text, and then but you really can't, because you have to look at what's happening around it, and then you have to zoom out to say what's the bigger picture here, what's actually happening in the historical context. And so that's what I'm really focused on right now, is kind of bringing that to light to folks, to say, you know, what's going on here? What's going on between the lines and in context?
I mean, with the Bible, I mean, it's always this thing with me, and the struggle is how to interpret it. Like Leviticus, it certainly seems that you need to definitely put this in a historical context. But what about the Bible seems to transcend historical context? You know, like, what are the verses that I'm really supposed to think are truly holy? Because I definitely don't think that verse is holy.
Definitely not holy.
But kind of separating historical context from a genuine holy book that you're supposed to take.
When I talk, go Janice. I've talked a lot. Go.
Okay. I think what we've tried to do at Milford, and this preceded Kaleigh's coming, so I don't know, is to try to read the Bible literately rather than literally, and not read it as a flat line narrative, but to read it as it was. There are some historical books, there's some poetry, there's some drug tripping things like Revelation, but to read it literally. I'm hoping that Frank is somewhere. I don't know if Frank does Zoom, but in Jesus' time, for instance, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, started a discussion. Jesus's teaching was always about answering questions with questions. For many in the Christian church, especially the fundamentalist churches, the Bible ends the conversation. Leviticus says this is what it means because I'm telling you what it means. We're not going to look at context. Leviticus is Leviticus. And I think that's the thread that folks like us are kind of competing against, which is that the church of control, the church that's a GPS that's going to tell you every twist and turn on life's journey. And it's going to say, if you have questions, I have answers. They're my answers, but I'm going to tell you. And if you follow them, you're going to go to heaven. And if you don't follow them, you're probably going to the other place. And we have a whole other narrative of what that I think in our church, we talk more about eternal life. Eternal life is now. You know, it begins now. It doesn't begin after we die. We don't believe in things like COVID-19 is punishment for bad things that I did. Yet I didn't put enough money in the plate, so COVID-19 came and smote the people.
But you know, it's
we're trying.
Janice, that you brought that up, because one of the things that I hear from people, and this is outside of church, is this is the way we've abused the planet. This is how COVID-19 has happened, and maybe now people will be smarter. And when they say that, it is like saying, we're being punished for abusing the planet. And I take big issue with that, as I'm sure you will, because it's pointing a finger, and it's like, this is something tragic that happened, and it's happening to every one of us all over the globe right now. And they say, well, maybe people will wake up. I mean, what do you feel about that?
I think there's a difference between consequences and punishment. And punishment is that God that just kind of randomly says, I'm bored, I think I'll smite Kaleigh tonight. You know, consequences are, I stand in the middle of the street and I get hit by a bus. So yeah, there are consequences, but the idea that God's above us with strings that are like pulling us. Okay, Stephen, time to lift your left arm.
Like a puppet, right? Like a puppet.
Yeah, like a master puppeteer. That's not a God I can believe in. It's maybe a God that I grew up with in Sunday school, but I'm not who I was when I was 5.
Well, I don't want to talk a little bit about who you were when you were 5. You too, Kaleigh, because the path that you both of you have chosen. You told me when we were talking aside, you said, Janice, that you were a cradle Methodist. I'm 72 years old. I'll say it. And I grew up in the Methodist church. My parents grew up in the Methodist church. My grandparents grew up in the Methodist church in the South. Wow.
And I grew up in the church in South Jersey, which is very much, if you know New Jersey a little, parts of New Jersey and the South are very much like being in Alabama or South Carolina.
You are right about that.
Carolina, baby.
100%.
I grew up at a time where I'm a baby boomer, so it was after the chaos of World War II and Korea, where churches needed to be a comfortable space for people to be and not be challenged too much, and to validate our worldview. And it didn't really tell us we were going to hell. It was more like an inspirational thing. You went, you felt good on Sunday, and it took you into Monday. As I evolved, I moved to the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So that was, and I never left the church. I never had one of those dramatic, I'm leaving now, this really sucks, and coming back 20 years later. I never left, but I evolved within it and began to attend a church on the Upper West Side that began to ask the questions. Okay, we have a food pantry. We're going to hand you a can of Campbell's soup. But to ask the questions, why do we need to do that when there's really enough cans of soup to go around? And became aware that although churches should not be partisan, we should not, Kaleigh should not stand up in the pulpit and tell us all who to vote for, but we can be political. We can advocate for good public policy of following in the footsteps of Jesus, who took care of the poor, reached out to the marginalized, fed the hungry, healed the sick. Healing the sick is no different than saying maybe we need to advocate for universal health care. That's real. So it's been that kind of evolution. I became around that time aware that there were gay people in the world, and I might know some of them. And then went from there to looking around to gay people, LGBTQ people in my life that I was very close to, our goddaughter, our son's godfather, clergy colleagues. My husband happens to be a Methodist minister, and many of our clergy colleagues in New York are queer. Can I use that word? Is that okay?
Use the word queer right here.
Reclaim it.
I don't want to do cultural appropriation here. So it's become a very pressing issue for me, because these are people that I love. These are my friends. This is Stephen. This is Simone. This is not theoretical to me. And found myself now in a church that's at least willing to entertain the questions of what what is this about? And a congregation of mostly people that are not going and expecting solid answers other than, God loves you and we're going to work out the details together in our community about what that means for all of us. And we're going to help people through the life cycle, through what they call in church circles, hatch, match, and dispatch. Baptism.
Hatch, match, and
Love it.
Great.
Funeral.
I love that.
The things that all of us go through in our lives, but the church needs to not only take care of its own within the walls or these days on Zoom, but to also be a voice in the community to advocate for things that are consistent with what the gospel tells us to do. Jesus tells us to go. Jesus doesn't tell us to stay here and hang out.
Right.
So that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Your story, that's incredible. And I have to say, sitting here, it's such an inspiration. And I know for people that are watching this right now, I mean, you're on fire. It's fabulous. Thank you so much. Kaleigh, what was your path? I want to hear your path.
Oh no, I think I went away for a second.
You're fine. You came back. I have that happen time. I know you had your back and now you're back.
I just don't know.
I know that's always my worst.
It's a little shot of adrenaline to get you on your way.
It's like, oh no. Tell us what your path was.
Mine? So I am not a cradle Methodist like Janice. I was actually baptized. I was born in Canada, and I was baptized in the Church of Canada, the Anglican Church. I feel very close ties to our founder, John Wesley, because he was an Anglican priest himself. And my mom and I moved back to the States. And when my mom and my stepdad got married, they were looking for a church. My stepdad was Catholic and my mom was Lutheran. And they met in the middle. The Methodist church was the one that would marry them. And then when I was like 5 or 6, we have some Jewish cousins. And my cousin Vicky had her black tie bat mitzvah, Grand Summit Hotel in New Jersey. Quite an event.
It was an event. I'm so sure.
I woke up the next morning and asked when my bat mitzvah was, and my parents said, "We better get this kid to church." Right. So I'm attending the Methodist church in the town in Caldwell, New Jersey, and I grew up going to church there. My parents were both involved, and we got a new pastor when I was about 13, who I think saw my call to ministry before I ever did. And he got me really involved in worship leadership. And, I really was always questioning what my path was. I went off to college. I went to Birmingham Southern. I went to college in the South in good old Birmingham, Alabama.
Love it.
And studied biology with hopes of becoming a scientist, working in pharmaceuticals, cancer research. Like that's what I wanted to do. And graduate, and then I applied for Teach for America my last year of college because it was in 2008. It was after Obama was elected, and every young person was going to change the world. Yes, we can. Like it was such a big deal. And along with every other young person graduating college who applied for Teach for America, I didn't get it, and I was like devastated. So I was in this like stage of questioning. I graduated college. I moved home. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no job. I had no friends because they were all still in Birmingham. I came back to New Jersey. And it was a time of real wrestling and questioning. And I remember sitting in like my pastor's office and saying, I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. And he looked at me and he said, like, have you thought about seminary? And I was like, yes, I have. And
I just got chills when you said that too, right?
That.
Yeah.
I was like, I have. And he's like, yeah, you need to think about it. And then like the things just started, like doors started opening. I got a job at my first church that I worked there for 6 years as a youth director, youth minister. I went to seminary at Drew Theological School in Madison, New Jersey. And it was there that I really began my eyes were opened to advocacy and work with LGBTQ rights. So it was huge at Drew at the time. Queer theology was a big, and and just, it was a very inclusive community that was really pushing the church forward. And so that's where I was kind of enlightened and really was interested in pursuing that route of advocacy work. And then began the long, arduous process in the United Methodist Church of Ordination, which took 10 years. I was just ordained last year here, or just last May.
Oh, mate. Oh, I love it.
And it was, what a moment, just what a moment. And my journey has taken me from Basking Ridge, New Jersey to Princeton, up to Sussex County. Most recently, that's where I served for 3 years, and now I'm here in Milford. But I think the biggest thing out of my journey with the church, with the Methodist Church in particular, a church that has done significant harm to people that I love, it's like you have a choice, right? So, I felt like when I decided to get ordained into this denomination, I said, I'm being ordained into a denomination that has this language, right? Is that something that I want to do? And it just sparked within me. I said, if I don't stay, who will? Like, who will stay and fight? Who will, there were people leaving in droves after General Conference, and they were tired. They had fought. They had been the people since 1972 at the forefront. And, it was time. And I said to myself and my colleagues, I said, the fight's not over. And I'm young and I still have it in me. I need to stay and make change.
Yeah. You're being asked to step up to the plate. That's very obvious.
Actually, I am a delegate. The way that's Methodist polity, but I will be representing our conference next year at the General Conference. I was elected by my colleagues to do that. And, it's a huge honor and a huge responsibility. But, it was like, if not now, if it's like, that quote that, if not now, when? It was like a powerful moment where I said, I have an opportunity here to stay and make change, for the future generations, for the LGBTQ youth who are in our pews, who, right, Trevor Project just came out, they said like 40% of LGBTQ youth have attempted or thought about suicide.
It's an unbelievable statistic.
That's not, and I'm like, the church has a role to play. And we as church people have an opportunity to say to our young people, you are loved because of who you are. And we haven't done that well. And I know with Janice, and I know Janice was always talking about, if we had a young person who was gay and who wanted to become a pastor, would we affirm them? Yes, we would. Hell yes, we would. Like,
I love her. I love your commitment.
Yeah.
Both of you, I love your commitment.
And just think about it. I mean, so we go back to 2008 when you were trying to Teach for America. Yes, we can. So where are you now? Yes, we can.
For you, right?
I know. That's so funny. I've never really made that connection. But, and I am an optimistic person by nature. And I tend to see the glass half full. Always. And I'm like, no, we can change this. And, even no institution is going to tell queer folks that they're not compatible, that they're not fully human. Like, my Bible tells me that everyone is made in the image of God.
That's right.
We were knit together in our mother's wombs. I mean, that is the bottom line here. It's not about who you love. It's about who you are and how God loves you. And no church, no institution can tell you otherwise. That's between, and I always say, like, we are not the judge of people. Leave that to God. But I know that God loves me unconditionally and loves all my siblings like that as well. But the church has work to do. I mean, we have reparations to make because we've done a lot of harm. We have reparations to make in a lot of places. We've done harm in many, many ways. The church is not exempt from corruption.
But look at you. Look what you're doing. Look at the work that you're doing. Look at the work that Janice is doing. And, the path that you're laying out for everybody else going forward, my gosh, it's all about support and it's all about love. And at the end of the day, that's what each and every person craves.
And that's what Jesus said. Love your neighbor. as yourself.
Your neighbor. That's right.
Not like when we talk about the scriptures, this Leviticus and Romans, and I'm like, but what did Jesus say was the greatest?
Yeah.
Love.
And the answer to, and who is my neighbor in Milford, Pennsylvania, it's TriVersity.
Ah.
And it's Milford United Methodist.
That's
right.
right.
Yeah. I mean, it's been such a joy to get to know both of you, and I'm so glad we're going to continue our partnership.
Yes.
And and it's just incredible. So
and we'll see you Thursday night too.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
And I
See you Thursday night.
till I can meet you in person.
Yes,
Absolutely. We're going to hold you to it.
one day.
Absolutely. Well, we want to thank you both so
Thank you.
much for doing this tonight.
Yeah,
We are
really.
honored to have you as guests, and we look forward to seeing you again on Thursday. And we will do one final plug again. We are live right now on Facebook. So feel free to give us a like or a love. And then this will be posted in the next week or so onto YouTube. So later on tonight, we'll post the link to YouTube in our comments.
Mhm.
So subscribe.
Cool.
And when this is posted, smash that like button, please.
That's
we
right.
will love
Go
you
for it.
forever.
Smash it. No, love you
Smash,
forever.
smash.
that button.
So
Press that like button. Press that subscribe.
Next week we have
Do it.
I can't say who it is, but we have another incredible show next Sunday night at 7:00. So be there or be square.
absolutely. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.